The crystalline spires of Fug Port rippled like heat waves over the Texas prairie, their bioorganic architecture seeming to defy not just Earth physics, but common sense itself. Knight Captain George Winters stood at parade rest before the customs desk, his powered armor's diagnostic systems quietly cataloging the various ways the city's impossible geometry was trying to give him a headache. As I mentioned, he drawled for what felt like the 100th time we're here on official business. His quantum spurs left lazy trails of blue fire across the living metal deck plating, a subtle reminder of exactly what kind of official business Texas Knights tended to handle. The lead customs agent, a being whose species name contained too many clicks and whistles for human vocal cords to manage, rippled its sensory filaments in what Winters had learned was the universal gesture for bureaucratic stubbornness. Protocol demands all weapons be surrendered before entering Fug Port proper. It insisted manipulating multiple holographic forms with its upper appendages while its lower ones continued processing other travelers. No exceptions. Behind Winters, his squad maintained their perfect formation, though he could sense their growing impatience. Sergeant Tyler Quickshot Kim's quantum pistol was humming a slightly higher pitch, always a sign he was getting annoyed. Corporal Chuck Jameson's power armor was cycling through its heat dispersion protocols more frequently than strictly necessary, and Private First Class Ken O'Neill's helmet sensors were probably recording everything for what would later become a very entertaining training video on how not to run a spaceport. "Now look here," Winters said, deliberately softening his accent in the way that always made his mama suspicious during his teenage years. "We've got ourselves a situation that needs attending to. Time sensitive, if you take my meaning." He gestured to the credentials floating in the alien's holoscreen. Those are signed by the Galactic Council themselves. The customs agent's visual processors adjusted, focusing on the Lone Star emblem on Winters' shoulder plate. The same emblem that had been seen on 100 battlefields, always preceding what the official reports like to call decisive resolution of conflict. Regulations are regulations, the agent chittered, though its primary sensory stalk had developed a nervous twitch. "Perhaps if you filed Form 27B6, Winters sighed. It was the kind of sigh that had preceded the Battle of New Austin, the kind that old-timers still talked about in bars on the edge of known space. "Kim," he called over his shoulder, "why don't you explain to these fine folks what kind of humans they're dealing with?" Kim stepped forward, his quantum spurs leaving perfectly symmetrical patterns of blue fire that somehow managed to look like the Alamo's floor plan. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive note of Texas Knight amusement, "should I tell them about the time my granddaddy went rattlesnake hunting with nothing but a stick and a bad attitude?" "Might want to start with the biology classification first," Winters suggested mildly. "Oh, right." Kim turned to the increasingly nervous customs agents. "See, where we come from. That's Texas, in case the Texans didn't give it away, we're what you folks call Deathworlders." The effect was immediate. The lead agent's sensory filaments went rigid, while its junior assistants started signing clearance forms so fast their appendages became a blur. One of them, apparently a rookie, emitted a high-pitched keen that made the station's gravity fluctuate. "Deathworlders," the lead agent stammered, its translator struggling with its suddenly squeaky voice. "Why didn't you say so? Please proceed immediately. Here's your clearance. All weapons authorized. Full diplomatic immunity granted. Would you like an escort? Refreshments?" A direct line to the planetary governor, Winters touched the brim of his Stetson, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and amusement. "Much obliged," he drawled and pretended not to notice when one of the junior agents fainted, its chromatophore cycling through what was probably every warning color in its species' visual spectrum. As his squad moved through the now hastily opened security gates, their powered armor adapting smoothly to Fug Port's ever-shifting artificial gravity, Winters allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes, being from Texas had its advantages. "Sir," Jameson's voice came through the squad channel, "should we tell them about Florida?" "Now, Corporal," Winters replied as they stepped onto one of Fug Port's gravity-defying walkways, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire in impossible directions. "No need to give these nice folks nightmares. They haven't even heard about Australia yet." O'Neill chimed in on the private channel. "Think these pirates have any idea what they're messing with? I mean, Command made this sound like we're protecting humanity's greatest cultural achievement. But last I checked, that was either barbecue or rodeos." "Keep your head in the game," Winters responded, though his voice carried a hint of amusement. "Whatever they're copying, it's important enough for the Knights to get involved. even if we're not quite sure why yet. Above them, Fugport's crystalline towers continued their impossible dance against the alien sky, blissfully unaware that they were about to host a very Texan brand of law enforcement. Winters checked his mission timer and nodded to himself. Even with the delay, they were still on schedule. After all, no one kept Texas nights from their appointed rounds. Not alien bureaucrats, not impossible physics, and certainly not a bunch of movie pirates who were about to learn why you don't mess with humanity's cultural heritage, whatever that heritage might turn out to be. The gravity-defying walkways of Fug Port writhed beneath their boots like living things, but the Knights' powered armor compensated without missing a step. Their quantum spurs left trails of blue fire that seemed to confuse the city's bioorganic architecture wherever the energy patterns touched. The living metal tried to grow into shapes that looked suspiciously like Texas bluebonnets. Kim mused over the squad channel as they navigated a particularly impossible corner that somehow turned left and right simultaneously. I'm starting to think Command's messing with us on this one. How do you figure? Jameson asked, his armor's sensors mapping out corridors that technically shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Well, Kim continued, stepping over a section of walkway that had decided to briefly exist in next Tuesday. Last time they got this worked up about cultural preservation, it turned out to be protecting the world's last authentic Texas chili recipe. No beans. O'Neill snorted, the sound carrying clearly through his helmet speakers. That was worth protecting, though. Did you see what those pirates were planning to do? Beans and corn. In Texas chili, focus up, Winters called out, though there was an undercurrent of amusement in his voice. We've got company. A group of local law enforcement officers had materialized at the next junction, quite literally, as their species apparently evolved from quantum-entangled energy beings. Their uniform pattern suggested they were part of Fug Port's elite cultural protection division. The lead officer's energy pattern shifted into what might have been a salute. Knights of Texas, it pulsed in carefully modulated frequencies. We are honored by your presence. The pause suggested they'd originally planned to use a different word than honored, probably something closer to terrified. Much obliged, Winters responded with the tip of his Stetson. I don't suppose you all could point us toward the entertainment district. We've got some business to attend to. The officer's energy patterns flickered rapidly, their equivalent of nervous glances. You mean where the incident is occurring? The lead officer managed. That'd be the one. We were instructed to maintain a safety cordon at least 3 quantum reality shifts away from your operation zone. The officer's frequency wobbled slightly. After what happened on New Austin, now hold on, Winters interrupted gently. That incident with the New Austin reality shifts was mostly accidental, and we did fix most of the temporal paradoxes. Most. O'Neill whispered on the private channel. Hush now, Winters sent back. To the officers he continued, we'll try to keep the quantum disruptions to a minimum this time. Knight's honor. The lead officer's energy form brightened slightly. We appreciate that, Knight Captain. The entertainment district is through that non-Euclidean passage. It indicated a corridor that appeared to be a Klein bottle crossed with an Escher staircase. Just please try not to break causality this time. The paperwork is impossible when events technically never happened. Much obliged for the directions, Winters said, leading his squad toward the passage. As they moved past the officers, he heard one of them transmitting on what they probably thought was a secure frequency. Did you see their quantum spurs? The stories are true. Forget the spurs, did you hear where they're from? Texas. On a death world. I heard they eat something called ghost peppers for fun. By the quantum core. I heard they invented something called mechanical bulls, once they were out of earshot. Jameson's voice came over the squad channel. Sir, what exactly did happen in New Austin with those reality shifts? Nothing that couldn't be fixed with a good rodeo and some proper barbecue, Winters replied cryptically. Now, let's focus on the mission. Whatever these pirates are copying, it's important enough that Command actually used the phrase sacred cultural artifact in the briefing. 10 credits says it's a recording of the first Texas high school football state championship, Kim wagered. 20 says it's the original plans for the Alamo, O'Neill countered. Why all are both wrong, Winters said with a grin they could hear in his voice. But we're about to find out. Their quantum spurs hummed in harmony as they approached their target, leaving trails of blue fire that somehow managed to form a perfect 5-pointed star with each step. Whatever these pirates were up to, they were about to learn an important lesson about messing with Texas culture. And if they were lucky, they might even survive the history lesson. As they navigated through Fug Port's reality-bending architecture, The Knight's powered armor continued leaving trails of quantum disruption that seemed to offend the city's sense of physics. O'Neill swore he saw one section of wall try to escape into a parallel dimension rather than deal with their presence. Speaking of Deathworlders, Kim said over the squad channel, as they passed what appeared to be a zero-gravity noodle shop, "You ever notice how the aliens never ask about the rest of Earth?" "Probably for the best," Jameson replied, his armor's sensors cataloging at least 7 different violations of conventional physics in the immediate vicinity. Can you imagine trying to explain Florida Man to these folks? A passing alien merchant, something with too many eyes and a customer service smile that transcended species, overheard them and froze mid-stride. "What?" it asked nervously, multiple eyes blinking in sequence as a Florida Man. Winters turned slowly, his quantum spurs leaving elegant blue patterns that somehow conveyed amusement. "Well now, that's a complicated question with about 1,000 entertaining answers, friend. But let's just say they make us Texans look downright reasonable." The merchant's translator glitched trying to process this information. More dangerous than Deathworlders. Different kind of dangerous," Kim offered helpfully. "Like the kind that sees a Category 5 hurricane and thinks perfect weather for a barbecue. And don't even get me started on Australia," O'Neill added. "Place where even the plants pick fights." The merchant's chromatophore cycled through several colors not visible to human eyes before it hurriedly excused itself, walking straight through what appeared to be a solid wall in its haste to escape the conversation. "Now look what you did," Winters drawled as they continued their advance. "Poor thing's probably going to need therapy." "Should we have mentioned the drop bears?" Jameson asked innocently. "Let's try to avoid causing any more interstellar incidents before we reach our target," Winters suggested, though his amusement was clear in his voice. Speaking of which, they rounded an impossible corner to find themselves facing what appeared to be an abandoned entertainment complex. The building somehow managed to exist in several quantum states at once, its architecture a mess of probability waves and violated physics equations. "Well," Kim observed, checking his quantum pistol's charge, "subtle ain't their strong suit." The building's facade was covered in what appeared to be posters for various Earth entertainment properties, though something had gone wrong in the translation. Star Wars had become luminous conflict between celestial bodies, and the good, the bad, and the ugly was rendered as the morally acceptable, the socially discouraged, and the aesthetically challenging. At least they tried. O'Neill offered diplomatically. Winters' armor picked up multiple life signs inside, along with energy signatures consistent with high-volume data transfer. "Remember, folks, we're here to make a point, not start an interplanetary incident. Weapons on stun, and try not to break too many laws of physics. The paperwork's hell when you accidentally create a temporal paradox." "What about the laws of Texas?" Jameson asked, his quantum spur leaving a pattern that looked suspiciously like the state flag. "Those," Winters said with a grin they could hear in his voice, "are non-negotiable." The squad moved forward with that distinctive night grace, their powered armor humming in perfect harmony. Whatever cultural treasure these pirates were copying, they were about to learn why some things were better left respected. "And hey," Kim added as they approached the entrance, "if we wrap this up quick enough, maybe we can still catch the quantum rodeo over in Sector 7. "First things first," Sergeant Winters replied, his hand resting casually on his quantum pistol. "Let's go teach these folks some manners, Texas style," O'Neill asked hopefully. "Is there any other kind?" The doorway beckoned, its probability field fluctuating wildly as the Knights approached. Somewhere inside, pirates were about to learn an important lesson about respect, culture, and why you should always check where your targets are from before starting trouble, especially if they're wearing Stetsons and quantum spurs. The inside of the building existed in several probability states at once, which would have been disorienting if the Knights hadn't been through worse during the infamous New Austin Time rodeo incident. Their armor's sensors struggled to make sense of rooms that were simultaneously empty and full, corridors that went everywhere and nowhere, and walls that had philosophical debates about whether they wanted to exist at all. "Places bigger on the inside," Jameson observed, his helmet displays trying to map spaces that shouldn't exist. "Ain't they all?" Winters replied, leading them through a doorway that opened into what might have been last Thursday. "Kim, take point. O'Neill, watch R6. Jameson, see if you can locate their main operation." The squad moved with practiced efficiency, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that seemed to stabilize reality wherever they stepped. The pirates had clearly been busy. Stacks of data crystals lined the walls, each containing what appeared to be copied entertainment from Earth's archives. Sir Jameson called softly over the squad channel, "Got something?" main copying station 2 probability shifts down, multiple targets, lots of equipment, and, report corporal. Well, sir, according to these readings, they're focused on one specific piece of entertainment. Something from the late 20th century. The energy they're putting into copying it, they must think it's mighty important. Winters led them through a series of quantum probability shifts that had his armor's navigation system filing formal complaints. As they approached the main chamber, they could hear voices arguing in at least 3 different alien languages. Look, the humans consider this one of their greatest achievements, one voice insisted. The cultural impact alone makes it worth triple on the black market. But why this one? Another voice questioned. They have so many other stories about their warriors, their conquests, their Texas Rangers. The knights paused outside the chamber, their armor automatically adjusting to match the local probability field. Through the quantum-distorted doorway, they could see about a dozen pirates gathered around what appeared to be ancient Earth video technology, carefully copying something that had their full attention. "Time to introduce ourselves," Kim suggested, his quantum pistol humming softly. "Might as well," Winters agreed. "Remember, folks, we're here to make a point, not start a war. Though if they resist, they won't," O'Neill said confidently. "Never met anyone dumb enough to fight Texas Knights over." He stopped mid-sentence as they entered the chamber and got their first clear look at what the pirates were copying. For a moment, even their quantum spurs went quiet. "Well," Winters said finally, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested someone was about to have a very educational day, "I do believe these fine folks need a lesson in media licensing and cultural respect." The pirates, finally noticing their visitors, froze in various poses of alarm. One of them, presumably the leader, managed to find their voice first. "Texas Knights? Here?" Its translator glitched with fear. "But this is just entertainment. We thought." "You thought wrong," Winters drawled, his quantum spurs leaving blue fire trails that somehow spelled out "come and take it" in perfect cursive. "Now why don't you all step away from that equipment, and we can have us a nice chat about the proper way to appreciate Earth culture?" The pirates looked at their copied data crystals, then at the knights, then at the ancient Earth video they'd been copying. Several of them seemed to be calculating their odds. "I wouldn't," Kim advised pleasantly. "You really don't want to find out why we took this mission personally." One by one, the pirates raised their various appendages in surrender. They might not have understood everything about human culture, but they understood enough to know one vital fact: you don't mess with Texas. Or its favorite movies. One of the pirates, apparently deciding that quantum physics was more of a suggestion than a law, dove through what looked like a solid wall, only to reappear upside down on the ceiling. This seemed to be some sort of signal, because suddenly the room erupted into chaos as the rest of the crew scattered in various impossible directions. "Well now," Winters drawled, his quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that somehow stabilized the local reality field, "that's just plain rude." The pirates split into 3 groups, each taking advantage of Fug Port's bizarre architecture. One group ran up a wall that might have been a floor. Another disappeared through a door that simultaneously opened into next week and last month, while the third tried to escape through what appeared to be a quantum probability tunnel. "Jameson, take the wall runners. O'Neill, handle that temporal door situation. Kim, you're with me on the probability tunnel. Remember, folks, minimal property damage this time. I'm still filling out paperwork from the New Austin incident." The knights moved with that distinctive grace that made their powered armor look like it was part of some complex dance routine. Jameson's quantum spurs left trails of blue fire as he casually walked up the wall that was maybe a floor, his movements making it look easy despite the local gravity's philosophical objections. "Pardon me, folks," he called out to the fleeing pirates, "but I reckon we need to have a conversation about copyright law." Over by the temporal door, O'Neill was dealing with pirates who kept appearing before they disappeared and disappearing before they appeared. His armor's temporal compensation systems were working overtime just to keep track of which version of the pirates he was talking to. "Now look here," he said to a pirate that technically wouldn't exist for another 3 minutes. "This'll go a lot smoother if I all just sit down and wait for yourselves to catch up to now." Meanwhile, Winters and Kim approached the probability tunnel, where the remaining pirates were trying to escape through a hole in reality that had about 17 different possible exits. "Mighty interesting choice of escape route," Winters commented as they walked forward, their quantum spurs harmonizing to stabilize the local probability field. "Don't suppose why all would like to reconsider." One of the pirates, its translator glitching with panic, waved what might have been a weapon in their direction. "Stay back. We have probability dispersal devices." Son Winters sighed, his Texan somehow maintaining perfect position despite the local reality's best efforts to exist in multiple states at once. "I've been through a Texas summer with a broken air conditioner. Your probability tricks don't impress me much." Kim's quantum pistol hummed to life, its energy signature making the probability tunnel hiccup. "Besides," he added cheerfully, "why all are about to learn why they call me Quickshot." The lead pirate looked at their probability dispersal device, then at the knights, then at the quantum tunnel that was starting to close in on itself, thanks to the stabilizing effect of the night spurs. "We, the pirate's translator, struggled for a moment. We surrender." "Wise choice," Winters nodded. His hand hadn't even moved toward his weapon. It hadn't needed to. Around the room, similar scenes were playing out as Jameson and O'Neill rounded up their respective groups. The wall runners had discovered that it's mighty hard to run on a surface that a Texas night has decided should behave like proper ground, and the temporal escapees had managed to trap themselves in a stable time loop that O'Neill was calmly talking them out of. "Sir," Jameson called out as he escorted his group down from the wall that wasn't, "what should we do with all this copying equipment?" Winters looked at the stacks of data crystals, the ancient Earth video they'd been copying, and the various pieces of technology that probably violated several laws of physics along with copyright law. "Well," he drawled, "I reckon we ought to make sure none of this causes any more trouble." Though first he turned to the assembled pirates. "I believe it's time we had us a little chat about respect, culture, and why some things are best left appreciated rather than copied." The pirates, now thoroughly subdued, nodded in whatever passed for agreement among their various species. Several of them were eyeing the Knights' quantum spurs with a new appreciation for just why Texas had such a fearsome reputation across the galaxy. "And maybe," Kim added with a grin they could hear in his voice, "we can explain why this particular movie means so much to us." "Good point," Winters agreed. "After all, cultural education is part of our duty too." The pirates were about to learn several important lessons about respect, about Texas, and about why some stories are better watched than copied. In a room that couldn't quite decide how many dimensions it wanted to exist in, Knight Captain Winters stood before the assembled pirates with the kind of patience that suggested he'd had plenty of practice explaining things to folks who'd made poor life choices. Now then he began, his quantum spurs leaving lazy patterns of blue fire that somehow made the local reality behave itself. "Let's talk about why are in this situation." The pirates, a collection of various species all trying to occupy as little space as possible, shifted uncomfortably. Their leader, a being with too many tentacles and not enough common sense, raised an appendage. "We were merely preserving human culture," the translator offered hopefully. Kim snorted, the sound carrying clearly through his helmet speakers. "Funny way of preserving, making bootleg copies to sell on the black market." Speaking of which, Jameson called from where he was examining their equipment. "They've got some interesting modifications here, sir. Looks like they were trying to add their own special features to the original." Winters turned back to the pirates, his helmet tilted in that particular way that made several of them try to hide behind each other. "Is that so? We thought we could improve it." One pirate offered, its chromatophores displaying what was probably embarrassment. "Add some extra scenes. Perhaps a different ending." "A different ending," Winters repeated slowly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that usually preceded Texas thunderstorms. "To this particular movie. The original was too simple," another pirate suggested, immediately regretting its life choices as all four knights turned to look at it. "Simple," O'Neill said, his quantum spur leaving a trail of blue fire that somehow managed to look disappointed. "They think it's simple, sir." "Well now," Winters drawled, "I reckon we ought to explain a few things about human culture. Kim, would you care to start the lesson?" Kim stepped forward, his armor systems projecting a holographic display of Earth. "See this? This here's what we call a death world. Place that tried its best to kill us every day, and instead of dying, we went and invented things like rodeos, ghost peppers, and mechanical bulls." "And sweet tea," Jameson added. "And sweet tea," Kim agreed. "Point is, we didn't just survive, we turned survival into an art form, made entertainment out of things that should have scared us, turned threats into tourism." One of the pirates raised a tentative appendage. "But what does this have to do with the movie?" "Everything," Winters said simply. "Because when humans finally reach the stars, do you know what we brought with us? Not just our weapons or our technology or our quantum spurs." He gestured to the ancient video they'd been copying. "We brought our stories, our hopes, our dreams about what might be out there. The pirates looked at the video with new understanding dawning in their various sensory organs. And this particular story, O'Neill added, this simple tale you were planning to improve, it's about friendship, about family, about reaching across the stars and finding something wonderful instead of something to fear. It's about a boy and an alien becoming friends, Jameson said softly. About proving that even beings from different worlds can understand each other, can help each other, can care about each other. Winters nodded. So when we heard someone was planning to take that story, that message of hope and friendship, and turn it into some quick credits on the black market, he let his quantum spurs flare briefly, leaving patterns of blue fire that made the pirates flinch. Well, let's just say we took it personally. We didn't know, the lead pirate whispered. Course you didn't, Winters agreed. That's why we're having this chat instead of doing things the hard way. He turned to his squad. Jameson, O'Neill, start collecting their equipment. Kim, help me gather these data crystals. As the Knights began dismantling the piracy operation, one of the pirates found the courage to ask, what happens to us? Winters considered this for a moment. Well, seems to me like y'all could use some education about human culture. I hear the University of New Austin has a fine xenocultural studies program. Might even have some scholarships available for beings looking to turn their lives around. The pirates perked up slightly at this. Course, he added casually, they're mighty particular about their admission essays. But I reckon a first-hand account of why you shouldn't mess with humanity's cultural heritage might make for interesting reading. As his squad continued their work, Winters looked at the ancient video that had started all this. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important battles weren't fought with quantum weapons or powered armor. Sometimes, they were fought with stories and phones that called home. The Knights worked with efficient precision as they dismantled the piracy operation, their powered armor adapting seamlessly to the rune's questionable relationship with physics. Jameson was carefully cataloging equipment that would later be donated to various research institutions, while O'Neill handled the data crystals with the kind of care usually reserved for rattlesnakes and mother-in-laws. You know, Kim mused as he helped Winters secure another crate of quantum copiers. My granddaddy used to tell me about the first time he saw this movie. Said it changed how folks thought about what we might find out here among the stars. Winters nodded, his quantum spurs leaving thoughtful patterns of blue fire across the deck plating. Changed how we saw ourselves too. Reminded us that sometimes the best response to meeting something different isn't to fear it. Speaking of different, O'Neill called from where he was examining a stack of data crystals. Looks like they were planning some interesting improvements to the story. Says here they wanted to add a space battle, 3 explosion scenes, and something called a quantum bicycle chase. A quantum bicycle chase? Jameson repeated incredulously. The whole point was that it was a regular bicycle. Found something else, sir, Kim reported, holding up what appeared to be a pristine original copy of the film. Reckon this might be their source material, still in its original Voss casing and everything. Winters approached to examine the find, his helmet sensors confirming its authenticity. Well, now that's something you don't see every day. Better secure that for evidence. Evidence, sir? Kim's voice carried a hint of amusement. Course. Need to make sure it's genuine. Might take several viewings. With popcorn. As they continued their work, the pirates watched in fascinated silence from where they were seated under O'Neill's watchful eye. One of them, apparently unable to contain its curiosity any longer, spoke up. Why does the small human not use quantum technology to reach their destination faster? Our analysis suggested numerous plot efficiency improvements could be made with. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got y'all in trouble, Winters interrupted, though not unkindly. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination. Sometimes the limitations are what make it special. But tell me something, Winters continued, turning to face the pirates. Any of why I'll ever ride a bicycle? Regular one, no quantum enhancements. A series of negative gestures answered him. Well then, how can you appreciate what it means to fly on one? This prompted a thoughtful silence from the pirates, broken only by the hum of quantum spurs and the occasional protest from local reality as the Knights' equipment forced it to behave normally. Sir Jameson called out, found their modification workshop. You might want to see this. Winters made his way over to where Jameson was standing before a workbench covered in what appeared to be storyboards for their planned improvements. The artwork was surprisingly decent, even if it completely missed the point of the original. Were they planning to have him phone home using a quantum-entangled communicator? Winters asked, examining one of the boards. Yes, sir. Said it would be more efficient. Lord save us from efficient storytelling, Winters sighed. Kim, Add that to the evidence pile. Might be worth showing at the next cultural preservation seminar as an example of what not to do. As they finished securing the last of the equipment, Winters took a final look around the room that had nearly hosted a very different version of a classic tale. Sometimes he wondered what the original filmmakers would think, knowing their story had become so important that the Texas Knights themselves would cross the galaxy to protect its integrity. "Sir?" O'Neill's voice broke into his thoughts. "What should we do with this?" He held up what appeared to be a half-finished script for their improved version. Winters considered for a moment. "Reckon we ought to keep that too. Sometimes the best way to appreciate what you've got is to see how wrong it could have gone. Like that time someone tried to add quantum-enhanced bulls to the rodeo," Kim suggested. "We agreed never to speak of that again, Sergeant." As they finished their cleanup, Winters couldn't help but notice how the pirates were starting to look at the original video with something approaching respect. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to teach appreciation for something was to stop someone from changing it. Even if their quantum bicycle chase did sound kind of interesting. But he'd take that thought to his grave. The local Fug Port authorities arrived to find a scene that would definitely require extra paperwork. The Knights had gathered the pirates in what was now the most stable part of the room, the reality-bending effects of the building seeming to give their section a wide berth, as if physics itself had decided to behave properly around the Texans. "Now then," Winters was saying as the authorities cautiously approached, "let's talk about what makes a story worth telling." The pirates, seated in a rough semicircle before him, looked remarkably like students in a particularly intense classroom. One of them was even taking notes with 3 different appendages. Knight Captain, the lead enforcement officer, pulsed nervously, its energy form flickering with uncertainty. "We received reports of quantum disruptions and possible timeline alterations. Nothing to worry about," Winters assured them, his quantum spurs leaving reassuring patterns of blue fire across the deck plating. "Just having ourselves a little lesson in cultural appreciation." Kim, standing guard near a pile of confiscated equipment, nodded. "Educational purposes only." "Ain't that right, folks?" he addressed the pirates, who nodded enthusiastically, perhaps too enthusiastically. You see, Jameson picked up the lecture. Human stories aren't just about the technology or the special effects or even the action. They're about the moments between the action. The quiet parts. Like a boy teaching an alien to play dress-up, O'Neill added, carefully securing another box of evidence that definitely needed multiple viewings to verify. One of the pirates raised an appendage. "But surely with quantum technology, the communication device could have what did we just learn about missing the point?" Winters interrupted gently. The pirate's appendage lowered. That sometimes limitations create possibilities? "Well now," Winters said, genuine approval in his voice, "looks like someone's been paying attention." The local authorities watched this exchange with a mixture of confusion and concern, their energy patterns suggesting they were trying to decide if this counted as unusual punishment. "We found this in their plans," Jameson announced, holding up a storyboard. They were going to have the bicycle scene involve quantum levitation and temporal loops. The gathered pirates had the grace to look embarrassed, or at least their various species equivalent of embarrassment. "The bicycle scene is sacred," Kim stated firmly. "Adding quantum anything to it is like putting beans in Texas chili. Or suggesting mechanical bulls need safety features," O'Neill added. One of the braver pirates spoke up. We have begun to understand why this story is important to humans. It's not about the technology at all, is it?" "Now you're getting it," Winters nodded. "It's about connection. About reaching across the stars and finding not an enemy, but a friend. About proving that different doesn't mean dangerous. Though we can be plenty dangerous when we need to be," Kim added cheerfully, his quantum spurs pulsing in agreement. The lead enforcement officer's energy pattern stabilized somewhat. What do you want us to do with them?" Winters considered this, adjusting his Stetson thoughtfully. "Well, seems to me like these folks have shown a real interest in human culture. Well, might be worth channeling that interest more appropriately." He turned to the pirates. "How many of y'all would be interested in a proper education in Earth cinema studies?" Every appendage in the group shot up. "I know some folks over at the University of New Austin," Winters continued. "Reckon they might be interested in a few case studies on the importance of cultural preservation." "And the equipment?" the officer inquired. "Evidence," all 4 knights said simultaneously. "For thorough investigation," Kim added. "Multiple viewings may be required," Jameson agreed. "With popcorn," O'Neill concluded. The local authorities, deciding that some questions were better left unasked, began processing the pirates for transfer to educational detention. As they worked, one of the pirates approached Winters. "Knight Captain," it said hesitantly, do you think we could watch the original? The real version? Just once?" Winters shared a look with his squad, then turned back to the pirate. "Well now, reckon that could be arranged. After all, can't proper appreciate what you almost changed until you understand what made it special in the first place." The pirates perked up noticeably. But Winters added firmly, "We're watching it proper. No quantum enhancements, no probability modifications. Just the story as it was meant to be told." "And popcorn?" one of the pirates asked hopefully. "And popcorn," Winters agreed. After all, some traditions are worth preserving. The Knight's ship hummed quietly in Fug Port's docking bay, its quantum drive synchronized with their spurs in a way that made local reality behave itself out of sheer respect. Inside, Knight Captain Winters was finishing his mission report while his squad secured their evidence in the ship's cultural preservation vault. "How exactly are you writing this one up, sir?" Kim asked, carefully placing the original VUS tape in a cushioned container. Winters looked at his report, quantum stylus leaving trails of blue fire across the datapad. Mission report, Cultural Preservation Directive 2187 location, Fug Port Entertainment District objective. Prevent unauthorized modification of protected cultural artifact status. Completed. Reckon I'll keep it simple, he replied. No need to mention the quantum bicycle chase they were planning. Shame about that, O'Neill mused, securing another crate of confiscated equipment. Almost wanted to see how they'd pull that off. Don't even think about it, Winters warned, though there was amusement in his voice. Last thing we need is someone getting ideas about improving other classics. Next thing you know, someone try adding quantum lassos to True Grit. Jameson, running diagnostics on their ship's systems, called over his shoulder. "Sir, University of New Austin confirms they'll take the pirates for their xenocultural studies program. Professor Martinez says she's looking forward to their essay on why some stories should remain unquantum." Good. Winters nodded, adding to his report, addendum, subjects displayed genuine interest in proper cultural appreciation. Recommend educational rehabilitation over punitive measures. Note, subjects showed particular promise after understanding the significance of unmodified bicycle flight. Think they learned their lesson? Kim asked, his quantum spurs leaving thoughtful patterns across the deck. Reckon they did, Winters replied. Amazing what a little cultural education can accomplish, especially when delivered by 4 Texas knights in powered armor. And the evidence, sir? O'Neill gestured to the secured VOS tape. Well now, Winters drawled, proper procedure requires thorough verification of authenticity. Multiple viewings. Complete analysis of cultural significance. Movie night. Jameson suggested innocently. Movie night, Winters confirmed, adding a final note to his report. Recommendation, maintain regularing of subjects' cultural education progress. Periodic reviews of original material essential for proper assessment. P.S. Remind quartermaster to restock popcorn supplies. As they prepared for departure, Winters looked out at Fug Port's impossible architecture. The city's quantum organic structures seemed to have settled down somewhat, as if the presence of Texas knights had reminded local physics about the importance of proper behavior. You know, he mused, reckon we ought to show them some other classics. Help them understand why we take this so seriously. Sir? Kim inquired. One might need to arrange a whole cultural education series, with popcorn, O'Neill asked hopefully. With popcorn, Winters confirmed. After all, can't properly appreciate Earth cinema without Earth snacks. Their quantum drive spun up, harmonizing with their spurs in that distinctive way that made space itself stand up a little straighter. As they prepared to depart, Winters looked at his squad, each of them standing proud in their powered armor, Stetsons at perfect angles. Mission accomplished, folks, he said. Reckon we did right by both Texas and cinema today. Think they'll ever try to improve classic movies again? Jameson asked. Not in Texas space, Kim replied confidently. Not anywhere, Winters corrected. After all, the eyes of Texas are upon them, his squad finished in unison. As their ship lifted off, leaving trails of blue fire that somehow formed a perfect Lone Star pattern, Winters allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the most important victories weren't won with quantum weapons or powered armor. Sometimes they were won with a boy, an alien, and a bicycle that definitely didn't need any quantum improvements. Though he had to admit, that quantum bicycle chase did sound kind of interesting, but he'd never tell his squad that. Some thoughts were better left on quantum. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like, and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.